Hi everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to another episode of Happy Strong Family. Today I'm your host Fatima and we are here with Sister Kulsum talking about a really important topic as you guys can see, which is how parents can sometimes harm adult children. So, hi Sister Kulsum, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, Alhamdulillah. I'm excited to be here.
Alhamdulillah, thank you so much for coming. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and this topic?
Absolutely. So, my name is Kulsum Khan. I'm the clinical director at My Narrative Therapy. I'm also a registered social worker and I provide psychotherapy to individuals all over Ontario. And I've been doing this almost for social work for a decade or so.
Okay, that's nice.
Yes. And about this topic, it's very close to my heart. I'm very passionate about it because it's something we don't talk about,
Yeah.
but it's impacted most of my clients that come to me. We usually talk about this in one way or another. So I think it's something that we just brush underneath the rug, pretend it
Yeah.
doesn't happen in the community. So I think it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and that is why I think it's so amazing that we're doing this topic, and I think it's just so beneficial. And it's one of those things that, yeah, we don't talk about often, but it's just so prevalent and applicable to so many people and so many different levels and shapes and forms. So, how do you, so when you work with your clients, what types of things do you see? I know you were talking about like the different types of abuse that you see. So, can you
Hmm.
tell us a bit more about that as well?
Absolutely. So there is financial abuse. So oftentimes we see parents making children pay for lavish weddings or purchases that they make or purchases that they feel like they need to make to keep up appearances in the community. And then asking children to contribute more than they can afford or using
Mm-hmm.
their names to build make credit cards or take out mortgages, that kind of stuff. It has to be done with, I think, a lot of gentleness and conversations
Yeah.
versus coercion,
Yeah.
which is often that what I find that comes up a lot in session. And also, the second form of abuse is physical abuse. So
Mm-hmm.
that's hitting, grabbing, shoving, slamming doors, breaking things, any form of physical abuse oftentimes comes up in session as well. And
That's hard.
it is. And I think physical abuse, sometimes we normalize it as well, like, Bollywood movies or is it Pakistani dramas? Like we see that there's like slapping and there's, I'm going to hit you with a shoe and now we've made it like a joke, but it's not funny,
Yeah.
right? Abuse is never funny, and it's never acceptable, no matter who is practicing the abuse, even if it's your own parents. And I think with physical abuse, sometimes we only call it physical abuse if the act has happened. And oftentimes, I see what parents do as well is that they have a threat of committing
Yeah.
that act, and that is the same as physical abuse,
Yeah,
whether
because
you
it
threaten
threat.
to do it
Yeah.
or actually do it.
Yeah, because it just triggers the person's like it just triggers their fear response.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's scary
Yeah.
as well. I also want to actually mention about the financial abuse when you mentioned. Um, yeah, I've seen that as well. Like it reminds me of how like some of my friends they wanted to do their own things financially, but they were feeling so much pressure, like buy a house. And it was just really like
Hmm.
weighing on her. And then I have another friend that I can think of that she was also being pressured, get a condo. And then she got a condo, was working full time. And then she felt like, wow, I was just stuck. Like I couldn't leave my job. I had to
Yes.
be in this, work full time, no days off, because you don't have to pay for a condo. And just that financial strain is so heavy,
Yes.
especially if it's like a woman receiving it, because like a woman having to work even more, because like women's cycles and everything, constantly having to work is just very more heavier on their nervous system and everything. So I was
Hmm.
just like, that's what I was thinking. It was when you were mentioning that as well.
Absolutely. And I think we have to be mindful of also riba too, right? And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times, what goes against Islamic principles and
Mm-hmm.
what is feasibility and can we live within our means? And it's all about practicality and if this really applies to my life or not, not just because other people are doing it. So now we have to put up a front for other people.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so there's other forms of abuse as well. So emotional abuse, which is, I think, very common.
Yeah, the most common.
Absolutely. And then it's also very normalized in our community as well.
All the time. People are
Yes.
like, oh, everyone's parents do that. Oh, that
Yes.
happened to me. I turned out fine. But
Yes.
yeah.
And I think emotional abuse oftentimes hurts more than physical abuse because we are not able to recognize it and we justify it.
Mm-hmm.
And the bruises and the wounds aren't actually physically seen, they're so internal,
Yeah.
right? So when there's a physical wound that we're able to see, we're able to say, hey, my parent broke my arm, so I can go to the ER and get it fixed, and now I'll heal, and then I can move forward in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when your parents puncture your feelings or hurt your feelings in some way, um, by saying things or cursing or calling names, or practicing manipulation, how are you going to heal? Because you can't see the wound. And there's so much shame in going to therapy and healing in that avenue that oftentimes people just hold it inside, right? And they keep
That
bottling it
is
up.
so hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so hard because, like, I know, like, something that's so helpful is like talking about your feelings and crying, which, by the way, guys, speaking to the audience, talking about your feelings and crying is very good, especially crying because it actually lowers your cortisol and your stress hormones. So crying is good. But, like, like, when you talk about and you cry, you feel so much better. So to think there are people out there going through so much, but they're not talking about it, they're not crying, I just think, like, how do you survive? That must be so hard, keeping it all inside.
Yeah. And you know what? I think that's an important topic because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times people don't have a safe space to cry,
Yeah,
right? They're
exactly.
shamed because they're crying, right? So
And that's exactly
oftentimes,
where it comes from. Yeah.
yeah, and oftentimes it's interesting because we have a biological natural tendency to see parents as experts, and that they will be nurturing and that they will be have empathy and compassion, right? Usually the idea of parents are like, they're so loving, they love you, they care about you. That's the
Mm,
idea, right? But when an individual is crying in front of their parents as a child or now as an adult and
mm,
saying, hey, you're hurting me, mom and dad.
yeah.
Like, this is causing me a lot of pain. And there is no safe space, and you're still being name called and you're still being ridiculed. Like, "Oh, suck it up. Why are you crying?"
Or
Right?
like, oh,
Or
you're just
like, get
crying for
out of here.
attention. Oh my
Yes,
God, stop
absolutely.
crying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, parents invalidate or they avoid, or they just make matters worse
Yeah, or
in
they
that
justify
scenario.
or they blame.
And I think that definitely further isolates that individual and puts them in a more further um, hurt position.
Yeah, that's very true. Do you have before we move on to the next one, I know the next one's a bit more heavier. Do you have any like tips or examples to set boundaries when this happens? I mean, it's kind of hard because a lot of children are living under like the same roof and stuff, but do you have any like tips for boundaries and things like that?
Yeah, I think recognizing there's emotional abuse happening is really important. I
Mm-hmm.
know it's really, really hard to recognize that a parent is emotionally abusive
Mm-hmm.
or practicing any other form of abuse because it goes against what society tells us,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So it's very hard. It's not an easy thing to do. I think we talk about these topics, but to implement them in our own life, it's a very hard thing to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it recognizes this greater need to acknowledge that not all parents are nurturing. And
Mm-hmm.
so first, going to a safe space, whether it's a therapist or a friend, where you can say,
Yeah.
I think my parents are abusive, and having that space. I also encourage individuals to journal their experiences so they can document what's coming up for them on a day-to-day basis and how it's making them feel, how it shows up in their life, so they can validate their experiences and recognize the patterns that are coming up, and then they can do something about it. So a problem named is a problem ready to be solved, or you can actually do something about it. But most people, they usually avoid and run away from it and say, it's not too bad. Come on, I'm making a big deal about this because they've been conditioned for such a long period of time to just brush it aside.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Or they just say, "Oh yeah, it happens to everybody. It's normalized."
Normalized.
Oh
Yeah.
wow, we said the same word at the same time.
Yeah.
It's
So
normalized.
normalized. Yeah.
It's so common. And yes, that may be true,
Hmm.
but the impact is still there.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, there's so many things that are normalized,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Exactly.
Like, we live in a society where there are a lot of things normalized that go against Islam, right? But what are we going to start engaging in those things? We
Mm-hmm.
don't, right? Because we know our boundaries and we know it's not aligned with our Islamic principles, right? It's not aligned with the person that I am, who I want to be. So now I have to do something about it. And wrong is wrong, no matter if everybody is doing it, right?
Yeah.
And I think change begins at home as well as we have to hold people accountable and also hold ourselves accountable. And what are we doing to better our lives and change for the future?
Yes, that's true. So, let's just say that somebody is going through abuse at home, and let's say if they've tried, the first step would obviously be like speaking up and telling the person how you feel. Sometimes people do stop and they change their behavior to be kind, but sometimes they continue their behavior, or in worst case scenario, they deny their behavior or they invalidate or gaslight or whatever. So when you're on the receiving end of that, how do you deal with it? Because I feel like yes, it's not personal, and that's very important to like tell yourself. Because sometimes children will be like, "Oh my god, like family is treating me this way. What did I do to deserve this?" So it's like they feel it's personal because it can condition you to feel that way. But yes, it's not personal, but like being on the receiving end of it is very stressful. So what would you do in that case when it keeps coming and it's not stopping?
So I think I want to start with the gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
Is not my everyone might know what gaslighting is, and
Mm-hmm.
actually that came up with an IG live I did last week, and everyone didn't really know the concept. So I'm
Oh
like, we could
wow.
talk about it. So gaslighting is when people make you question your reality. You
Mm-hmm.
think that it hasn't happened. What the person is saying, no, I never said that. I never meant that. You interpreted it that way, but it actually did happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it encourages the journaling, right? Because then you remember facts as they are.
Mm-hmm.
And where people are not receptive to change, there's not going to be any change. I think it's the individual's responsibility then to find their alternative coping mechanisms to process the grief that comes with also letting go, right? I think it's just oftentimes people see things as black and white. I
Mm-hmm.
either have to cut my family off or live with them,
That's very black and white. Yeah.
right? And so it doesn't have to be that way, right? You can figure out what works for you and where you are at in life. And with any presentation or podcast, I say everything is context specific. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to make sure that the
Context.
individual's context is assessed as it is.
Yeah.
And the only way to really do that is sit one on one with a professional who can say, okay, these are some of your rights, or these are some of your pros and cons in the situation, what you can do, and basically do like help you do it like an audit, right, and how you're going to move forward.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, every situation is so context specific. Like some people's situation are more severe. Some people they have emotional abuse, but they don't have that much gaslighting. Some people have more gaslighting. It's like everyone has different contexts. Subhanallah.
Yeah.
I also want to say I saw your Instagram. I was like exploring it, and one of the things you mentioned was exercise. I feel like exercise could be a great coping mechanism because I'm seeing all these things on my Instagram, like like emotions are in the body, and when you
Hmm.
move, like emotions move and you process them more. So you posted a post about exercise. So how could you talk more about how that could be a potential coping mechanism?
Absolutely. So what happens is when we're talking about any form of abuse, our nervous system is very sensitive. It knows when it's dysregulated, right, around people. So you're going to have higher cortisol levels where you're not
Mm-hmm.
safe. So actually, this is interesting because I use it in different forms. So one of the things that I use it in is when an individual is feeling triggered by people around them, remove yourself from that situation before you say something or do something that is not going to make you feel good, right? Because the reality of the situation is that when we are around people who are practicing abusive behaviors, we also become abusive. That's the reality because it triggers us, and then in our self regulation and emotional regulation, all of that kind of goes out the window, and we just enter a survival mode, and we're just trying to
Yeah.
survive, right? It's like the show Survivor, right? Everyone's trying to survive in
Mm-hmm.
that environment. So I usually say remove yourself from that situation. Go for a walk,
Yeah,
right?
go for a walk.
Go to the gym. So I think when you said coping mechanisms at home, like what do you do? The reality of many people's situation is that it's expensive to move out. It's very easy to say, okay, go live with roommates, go move out. It's not always feasible. It's a very hard decision to make, right? Especially if you're in immediate danger. Yes, of course, seek help right away, and yes, moving out would probably be a good option if you're in immediate danger and harm. But it's very, very expensive, right? Especially Toronto housing prices, rental. It is expensive.
I have
So
a quick question. Is
yeah.
it haram? Like, let's say somebody, I know most of the time it's expensive. Like, most of the time it is. If somebody happens to have the means, is it haram?
So I'm not an imam, and I can't say it's haram. But I
Okay.
mean, when we talk about abuse, a lot of times, Sheikh Omar Salaman says that the only person that you have to obey blindly is Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Your parents are not God. You can't obey them blindly,
Exactly.
right? And so, the Prophet, peace be upon him, has said that, you have to get yourself out of oppression. Right, from the closest narration is get yourself out of oppression. Don't put yourself in a place of oppression, and help those who are oppressed. Parents can be oppressors. That's the reality. Parents can be oppressive. And it is our responsibility to get ourselves out of that oppression, because you can only thrive as a healthy Muslim when you have gotten yourself out of oppression. If you can, right? Everyone, I guess, and their context is different, right? If you don't have the financial means and your parents are the only people that you rely on, you're going through a war and famine, of course, that context is going to be really different. But if you're
hmm
privileged and you can go and sustain yourself and you can go take care of yourself, many of us, and I've seen many of my clients, can have better relationship with their parents when they have moved
hmm
out
Yeah,
versus
I've heard that before.
when they're
Yes.
living with them, right? Because what happens is people also are taken for granted, right, when they live together. So oftentimes they say, moving out, it may not always be feasible, but use the gym, use a yoga studio, use the mosque as temporary coping mechanisms of safe places you can go to and create a sanctuary for yourself when there's chaos at home.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. I asked that question first and foremost if it was haram, because sometimes I would hear the stuff that is haram,
Mhm.
especially in South Asian culture. It would be haram, especially for like a woman. So that's where it came up. But that's a very good question. And you're, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, parents, sometimes family can be oppressors and you have to remove yourself, because when you're away from oppression, that's when you truly thrive. So yeah, absolutely agree. And if you're not able to move out, going out to like the gym or spending time with friends who are going to be that loving, safe space. Because as humans, we have those emotional needs to feel loved and respected. That's just how it is. We have
Mhm.
physical needs for sleep, food, water. We have those emotional, social needs to feel loved and respected. So getting it from friends is like a good outlet. And going to the mosque, I love how you mentioned that, because just in general, I love going to the mosque. Alhamdulillah, they have so many programs, especially at ISNA. It's just really nice. So
It
yeah,
is, yeah,
Alhamdulillah.
absolutely. And it's finding your safe spaces and places, right, in the community that exists until you get yourself to a place where you can eventually move out. That can be a long-term goal.
hmm
But I think let's talk about
Yeah.
safety at home, right? So there are safe spaces outside, but we usually don't talk about, when you said haram, we usually don't see abuse as haram. Like there's haram being done at home,
Yeah, but that's not
right?
acknowledged that
It's not
much.
acknowledged. So just like, oftentimes in these conversations regarding abuse, parents say, I have these rights over you, you have to obey me. But what about the rights of children? Don't children
Yeah.
and adult children have rights over their parents too? Absolutely. But that is just so selectively
Yeah, it's very
taken out,
selective.
right, from
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, or like they may say, "Oh, like you're not obeying me, you're not doing this. Fear God. God is going to punish you."
Hmm.
And of course, like in Islam, we be respectful to our parents and we apologize if we raise
Yes.
our voice and stuff. But sometimes they're not acknowledging that their behavior can also be, like God is watching. And it's really tough because it's like, it's like both. It's not black and white. Like on one side, we love our parents, we care for them. I think it's really good to be in the habit of like, asking Allah to always, like bless them, love them because they did so much for us, and also acknowledging that some behaviors are like so harmful and God is watching. So yeah, there's that side as well.
Absolutely. And we have to remember that children are actually amana to their parents. Whereas parents aren't an amana to their children,
That is so interesting.
right? So when we think about amana, I give you a car, right? Just let's just say, I give you my car to borrow, and you take that car on a joyride. You take it through Lake Ontario. You take it through, Blue Mountain, through the mountains. You take it everywhere, right? It's
Mhm.
destroyed, right? You hit it, you yell at it, you treat it really poorly, right? And then you give it back to me. Am I gonna be happy?
No, you trusted me with that car, and yeah, what happened to
Absolutely.
the car? Yeah.
Absolutely, right? So before I question you about anything else, I'm gonna be like, I gave you this. Like before I ask you how you're doing and how you know, anything else, I'm gonna ask you about the car. Why did you not take care of my car?
Hmm.
Right? So that's amana, right? And then there's another layer of amana there too. And I think I talked about this previously in the other podcast. With the last time I was here, is that your brain, your body is your amana, especially as adult children. I think sometimes we forget that we are now adults, right? Once you're over the age of 16 and 18, you can make most of your own decisions,
Hmm.
right? And so because you're an adult now, you have the ability to do a lot of things you weren't able to do when you were 5 and 6,
Yeah.
right? You have the ability to walk away, especially if you have the privilege of having a full-time job and having some money and savings and all those things, right? You have the ability to take some space, right? So I think oftentimes people forget that their body is their amana, and that they will be held accountable if they're, getting slapped by their parents and they have abuse physically inflicted on them. Yes, the parent will be questioned, but the individual will also be questioned for taking care of their own body. How did you take care of your soul? How did you take care of your physical body?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point because I feel like we don't talk about that enough. Like, of course, the oppressor is held accountable, but we don't talk about that. And yeah, like, like it says, like, don't, I heard a quote, like, obviously, like, don't oppress, but also don't be oppressed and try your very best to,
Yes.
not be oppressed. And also, I heard this thing, the best way to help an oppressor is to stop them from oppressing others. So that could even be like, okay, like you're at home and people are trying to oppress you, you're gonna be like, okay, no, this is not healthy, I'm not going to participate, and you go for a walk, so that way they cannot continue to oppress you because you just walked outside for a walk.
Yes.
Or being like, okay, this behavior is going to continue, this is not healthy, I'm going to the masjid. And of course, not just going to the masjid or the gym or wherever, or being with friends, and not only to escape, like, yes, you need that distance, but also, like, finding moments to like pray to God, because I feel like it's just nice to pray to God, and that's what our deen is about as well. So
And that
yeah.
that takes me into the next topic that I wanted to talk about, was spiritual abuse.
Perfect.
Right? So, with spiritual abuse, oftentimes parents use Islam to weaponize, right? And to use it as a tactic to coerce their children doing certain things. So, our parents can oftentimes say, God won't forgive you if you don't listen to me, or, you're going to go to Jahannam, if you do X, Y, and Z, right? And that that's very powerful for a lot of people. That stops people in their tracks from doing anything, right? It's very scary to go to hell because you're not listening to your parents. But again, it brings me back to that point that parents can weaponize it, or individuals can weaponize anything that they want to. But that doesn't mean that Allah does that, right? So it's important to remember that Allah loves you unconditionally. Allah's love is unconditional. Whereas with parents, most often it's not unconditional.
It's
The
conditional.
It is conditional. And the idea is, yeah, parents, should love us unconditionally, but do they? The reality is different.
Yeah, they love
Right?
you more, like the more sometimes you follow them blindly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not generalizing, like all parents are
Yeah, the
like this,
context,
right?
yeah.
There are parents that absolutely love their children unconditionally. So yeah, and that, that also brings me to the point that, mothers can be jealous of their daughters, fathers can be jealous of sons, and spouses can be jealous of their children. So this is something we don't talk about, right?
Yeah.
Because if we don't talk about it, then it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and it's hard for some people to like grasp onto it, maybe because it's just not talked about, or maybe because they just haven't experienced it, but it does happen sometimes depending on the context.
And I think people do experience it, but they're in the state of cognitive dissonance where they're going to believe what they want to believe, even if the facts tell them otherwise.
Hmm. Yeah, I do see sometimes people almost denying it, or just being in denial, or just having a hard
Hmm.
time admitting it.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe the truth is so painful, I'm not sure, but yeah.
The reality is the truth is painful. It is painful. Who wants to
Yeah.
acknowledge that the parents that they have are abusive? They are not nurturing, because it goes against what society believes. Because when you open, I always say this to my clients, is when you open your eyes, like as a baby for the first time, right? Who do you see? Your
Your
parents.
parents.
Right? So, and they're like feeding you, they're taking care of you. So you have expectations that they're going to nurture you, because from day one, they have nurtured you, right? They're feeding you, they're changing your diaper, they're holding you, they're goo guying over you. But at some point, something happens where that stops, that nurturing stops, right? And it's particularly in children who have been parentified, where the roles become reversed, where the parents require the parenting from the child, and the child is now parenting their parents.
Yeah, that can happen as well.
Yeah.
So, what is the last form of abuse that I know you mentioned? I was like, wow.
Yeah. So, I want to talk about a very sensitive form of abuse that we don't talk about in the Muslim community. I'm just going to give a disclaimer. So, we talk about inappropriate touching and sexual abuse. It happens in the Muslim community, it happens in the general community. And we need to teach our children how to protect themselves and have a greater conversation about safety. And when I say teach our children, I mean teachers have an obligation to have conversations with their students at school about what is safe and unsafe touching. And even, our leaders in the Muslim community, we need to start having these conversations, because abuse often happens at home, and that sexual abuse does happen at home.
Hmm. Yeah, even I was a little bit like, whoa, when you mentioned it, but yeah, it happens.
Absolutely, it does.
Hmm.
Right? And often with people that we think are safe people, right? It could be someone's biological parent that can be sexually abusive. It could be their aunt, their uncle, any family member.
Hmm. That's a hard one.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it has lasting consequences. All forms of abuse have lasting consequences on individuals, right? And especially when our most vulnerable children, their brains are being developed. And so when they grow up in an unsafe environment, they become adult children who then project their trauma right onto the world, because our parents have their own trauma, which they have projected onto us. Usually I think parents don't think that they're doing a bad job, right? I don't think any parents are like, okay, I am today I'm going to go and harm my kid. That's my mission.
Hmm.
I think parents often have mental health issues, unresolved trauma, anxiety and fear, and other things that they haven't worked through, that they project onto their kids, right?
Hmm.
So I'm not here to villainize parents.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm here to recognize that there is a problem, and that we can't justify the fact that our parents have trauma, anxiety, fear, and that's why they're doing this. We can understand it, but
Hmm.
then now we have a responsibility to do something about it
Hmm.
for us, so we no longer project that onto our own children,
Hmm.
our partners, our friends, and our other relationships. So we need to heal and end it with us.
Yeah, breaking the cycle basically.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I also want to say I feel like one way to really break the cycle is like when any adult child is on the receiving end of this and they know what it feels like to be hurt, to not feel loved or respected, like that's a lot of pain. So just knowing what that pain feels like and how hard it is, like, and being like, this pain is so much, like, wow, it's just so hurtful. I don't want to cause this pain to another person because I know what it feels like. I don't want to do it to another person. When I went through this, it was really tough. I just can't do it to another person, so let me be mindful not to. And I think, there's this saying that a lot of the kindest people emerge because they've been through so much abuse, and they've tasted it, but they don't want to like give that to other people because they know what it's like. So I think this can sometimes be good because it can help us be kinder people and break the cycle and have a more generate like another generation that feels more loved and that can thrive and serve the ummah and all of that.
Absolutely. And it will allow individuals to heal and live a meaningful life. Right. And I think most of us, I mean, I'm a parent to a 2-year old,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So I think, we have the greatest intentions as children, of immigrant parents who have gone through their own dysfunction and trauma. We want to do the best for our child. But the reality of the situation is that the intention has to align with the action, right? So we can have the greatest of intention, but we can still end up yelling, screaming, and practicing the same behaviors our parents did because it's just what we learned, right? It just becomes like this automatic response. Even if we try to stop ourselves, it's just we go into autopilot mode because that's the only way we've learned how to parent or to communicate. So, you know, moving forward and healing also requires unlearning, and unlearning is done, I think, and I'm very biased, when you're held accountable, right? When there's someone saying, hey, you know, why did you behave the way that you behaved? And the truth is, if our friends say, hey, why did you behave the way that you behave? What are we gonna say? We're gonna become defensive. We're gonna be like, I don't like you anymore. I'm not gonna hang around with you, right? Our siblings turn to us and they say, hey, why did you yell at me? What are we gonna do? Well, most often we're gonna become defensive, right? Like, don't talk to me that way. You're the worst sister in the world.
Gaslighting.
Yes, it's just because it's really
Conditioning.
hard. It's really
Yeah.
hard to step away from those practices and those behaviors. But I think if you go to a third party perspective, that's why I really think therapy is very, very important, is because when you're like, I need to change these behaviors, I need to move forward with my life, it allows you to grieve the parents that you wish that you had, because it requires grief. It requires a space where you can really accept that your parents are the way that they are. Accepting does not mean saying, okay, I accept the behaviors. You accept the reality as it is versus run away from the reality and idealize the potential of what your parents could be. Right? So it requires a lot of deep inner work, and requires holding ourselves accountable and having someone say, okay, this is what needs to change. I see improvement, but these are the different aspects we need to work on.
Yeah, I see that as well. Like a lot of people sometimes they just repeat something just because they saw it at home. One time somebody told me, "Oh, I hung up the phone on you. I didn't think it was that bad. I just did it because like my parents do it. I'm used to it." And I was just like, "Wow, that's interesting." For me, because me personally, I'm such a feeler, so I'm just like, but didn't that feel like your heart was being closed off? Didn't that feel disrespectful in your heart? Like that's what I think.
Hmm.
That's because that's just my temperament or how like I think. But yeah, like it was basically relating to what you're saying. They're just doing it just because that's what they saw, that's what was done to them, that's what they witnessed.
Hmm.
So sometimes that can happen. But yeah, I think like really taking your time to feel like just maybe one moment to really feel like how hurtful it is and being like, wow, like I really don't want to like continuing that could be one part of the process. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we treat people the way that we have been treated. It's just how it is, right? And if you have been grown up thinking that love hurts, then you're going to hurt other people because you think love hurts. It's okay to hurt other people.
Oh my God, that just a lot of things you're saying are making me think of real life examples. Yeah, another person they were saying, oh yeah, love is like that. We just hurt the people that we love. I'm like, oh my God, are you hearing yourself? But yeah, like
Yeah.
they're gonna think that because that's what they witnessed and stuff, and then I'm explaining to them, not necessarily. Not necessarily. It doesn't have to be that way. Yes, that was our experience, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's a
subhanallah.
choice,
It's a
right? It's a
choice.
choice that we make, especially as adults now. I think as children, our brains are not fully developed, right? Our
Mm-hmm.
brains fully developed by 25, our frontal lobe
Mm-hmm.
develops by 25. So, as a child, you may find yourself limited with certain things, right? Children get dysregulated, start screaming, yelling, crying, all those things,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're not a child anymore. You shouldn't be behaving like a child. And that's what I often say is that, you know, parents sometimes don't grow up. We can have emotionally immature parents.
Yeah, and there's a book on it as well, like
Yes,
adult children of
children.
emotionally mature parents.
Yes, I
Yes.
love that book,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's an important read, that book for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's this idea that with age comes wisdom. And for some people, that can be true, but not for a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
right? With age just comes more emotional immaturity.
Yeah. Yeah. So I see you have so many other notes. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I want to also talk about is that parents often put on a performance in front of others. So, individuals can self doubt as well. And that can put them in a position where they can't tell the difference between reality and what's actually happening. So, I think it's important to journal when that's happening and seek professional help. But we can now go to the questions.
Yes,
I think from the
Jazakallah khair.
audience.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
was
no
trying
problem.
to. We do have some questions from the audience.
Sure.
So before we get there, I did want to share some contact information here. So if you tell us a little bit about this. So we have mynarrativetherapy.com. I've been displaying it on the screen. So
Awesome.
if you tell us a little bit about that, like what is it? What can people expect? Is it
Absolutely.
online, virtual?
Yeah, so I used to be called Kulsum Cares, and then I rebranded to My Narrative Therapy because it's more than Kulsum now. So I have three or four other therapists on the team. Alhamdulillah, I've expanded now. So it's an
MashaAllah.
online clinic, right? So anyone in Ontario can access the clinic. It's a virtual clinic. And so it's called My Narrative Therapy because I think everyone's narrative is really important. How we think about ourselves is really, really important because it's how we see the world. So if we can change how we see the world, it will change the decisions that we make every single day and how we live our life so we can live a very meaningful life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we call it My Narrative Therapy, and it's a safe space for Black indigenous people of color. Everyone's welcome at our practice, so that's really our focus. And I wanted to remove the barrier of a lot of financial stressors as well on individuals. So we try to make access easier for people who have health insurance through work. So we offer a lot of direct billing options and also a sliding scale for people who can't afford therapy as well.
Nice.
Jazakallah khair. Then we also have your Instagram page here, which I am sharing. So you can find her at Kulsum Cares on Instagram, and I think you're responsive through there. If people did have follow up questions, that's probably one way they could ask. And
Absolutely.
okay, Jazakallah khair. So now that let's get to some of the questions that have come in. I'll go to the live ones first in case the folks, we also had some come in through Instagram earlier. Let me go to the live comments here. So we're seeing, mashallah, thank you to the host and guest for bringing light to these important topics. We need more discussions like this.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. May Allah reward you both immensely for
Amen.
having the courage to take on these topics. So
Mm.
let's see. This is another comment. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. Very important topic. Jazakallah khair for covering this podcast. May Allah reward you immensely.
Mm.
Was I think question?
Yep. So here's a question. As an observer I think it should say, as an observer, if you see someone suffering and suspect some kind of abuse, what is the best approach? Too often we stay silent.
Absolutely. So I think staying silent is just as harmful as being abusive. So please do say something, but say something in a way you don't put the other person's safety at risk. So please be mindful. So I would say if that person is an adult who you are seeing is going through some abuse, you go out for a coffee with them, you meet them at a mosque and have a gentle conversation with them, and just out of curiosity. I think sometimes we want to say things very directly and like, I think you're being abused. Most people will not react well to that, right? So we want to be very gentle with our delivery and respectful that this might be the first time they're hearing this, or maybe they may not be ready for that. So I always say approach things with curiosity and respect and say, hey, how are things going at home, right? I've observed some things, but I just really want to know how you're feeling at home, right? So from a very concerned and caring perspective, we also want to make sure, in our community, we have a problem with the phishing for information. So we want to make sure we're also protecting the confidentiality of other people around us. And we're being very God conscious when we do that.
Jazakallah
Mm.
khair. Yeah, I'm not endorsing Martin Luther King or anything. I know, but I just remember his words. Like it resonates with me a lot. That where he said like, I won't remember the words of my enemies. I'll remember the silence of my friends. So
Mhm.
it's just what you're saying. Yeah, say something. But
Yeah.
so there's another question here. Is silent treatment a form of abuse? What's balance difference between taking a space away and taking space away? I guess okay, taking space from something and
Mhm.
Mhm.
silent treatment.
Yeah. So another terminology for silent treatment is stonewalling, which is a form of emotional abuse. And the difference between stonewalling and taking space is that when people stonewall, they stonewall because they're trying to punish the other person. I won't talk to you because you did X, Y, and Z to me. Whereas taking the space that you need requires some clear communication. It's saying, hey, I need an hour to take a walk and think about how what you said made me feel, or just need some space to process my thoughts and my feelings. And we'll regroup maybe tomorrow or later in the evening today at 6 to discuss what happened today. So it requires some communication when we're taking safe space, and we're not doing it as a form of punishment.
Jazakallah khair. Beautifully explained. So we have another question that had come in. How do I deal with feelings of extreme guilt for not doing enough for my aging elderly parents?
Absolutely. So I think there is rational guilt and then there's irrational guilt. It's really hard to be a child of an adult child of a sandwich generation, and I'm a part of that sandwich generation. By sandwich generation, I mean, you're taking care of your elderly parents, and you're also taking care of your own child and relationship. So it's really really hard to do that. I think it's very very challenging in a society, especially in Canada. We're so individualistic. Everyone's busy around us, right? And we don't have the supports needed. So I think it's really important to sit down and think about, okay, the guilt that I'm experiencing, is it irrational guilt or is it rational guilt? Am I doing something wrong or bad? And is it feasible, the expectations that I put on myself? Because every individual will have different expectations from you, but that doesn't mean it's always realistic or reasonable expectations, right? So I think you have to assess what is feasible for you, and what are some of the things that you need to be there for, and what are some of the things you can outsource as well. Sometimes we feel very guilty with outsourcing things, but you have to sit down and see what works for your family.
Jazakallah khair. So the next question we had here was, I want my brother and his wife to get their own place as our home has become depressing.
Mm.
Everyone walking on eggshells. My parents will not entertain idea at all. Advice. And also, if you can, I don't know if you're familiar with the term walking on eggshells, but maybe if you can explain what that is also, just in case folks may not be familiar with it.
Yeah. So basically, the terminology "walking on eggshells" is feeling like you're trying not to trigger the other person or um, create any form of uncomfortable feeling. So you're like tiptoeing around all the time in your home or even emotionally around subjects because you're afraid the other person is going to blow up on you or are going to have a negative response or a negative reaction.
Mm.
Right? So that's really hard because oftentimes our parents, I love this idea that I and it's my own idea. I get but this idea I always tell individuals is this idea of hum saath saath hai. I don't know if anyone has watched Bollywood, is that oftentimes we're like we're gonna be this happy collective family, but it's like all for show, right? There's so much dysfunction going on underneath, but we're trying to uphold the idea of like hum saath saath hai, right? We're all together,
Mm.
right? And it's this idea from our collective community, right? Like I said, we come from collectivist cultures, but it's not always the best thing to do. And people want to put on a performance for others, and it's really hard to
Mhm.
convince our parents not to, right? Because they come from these like really rigid beliefs.
Yeah.
They're not willing to let go of change. So if
Yeah.
they're not willing to let go of that and change that belief system, it's like you talking to a wall, right? They're not
Yeah.
really going to be receptive if you've tried everything possible, right?
Mhm.
So I think you can only control the decisions that you make. And if you're an individual who has some form of autonomy and ability to, then you go and pursue a new job in another city or another place, or get your own place if you can,
Yeah.
or find a way to create a safe space that's not part of your current space,
Mhm.
and find different avenues of doing that.
Yeah.
Jazakallah khair. So on the Instagram, I'm seeing a live question coming in also. So many times yelling and shouting is often used over adult children. So what would you recommend to like someone in terms of support? So yeah, that's the question coming in. Yelling and shouting from your parents, what would you recommend they do?
Absolutely. So the thing is, parents oftentimes use yelling and shouting because they think that they can get their point across if they yell and shout, and that's just creating a fear-based tactic, right?
Mhm.
It's just dominating your power and control. So you can say, "Hey, I am powerful. I'm screaming and shouting." But you know what happens? I always tell my parents this. I see a lot of parents in my practice. No one's listening when you're yelling and shouting. People tune you out when you're yelling and shouting. You don't respect yourself, and then other people don't respect you, right? So when someone else is yelling and shouting, that conversation has already ended. It's not going anywhere, right? So as soon as someone's yelling and shouting, you're like, you know what? I don't think this is a helpful conversation. I think it's better if we step away and we come back when we're a little bit more calm and relaxed and collected.
Thank you very much. And then we have one more question here. So how to make a spouse recognize his or her parents are toxic and that sorry are toxic and my spouse's constant need to please them at the expense of our relationship and kids is having negative consequences. So yeah, I thought. Bill, can you also like define the word toxic? Like I feel like we see that hear that word a lot and it's it's used a lot. But what does it
Yes.
actually mean and what actually is toxic? Because I like everyone seems to think everything is toxic sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I think it's like a term that's always being thrown around. Like what's like a pop psychology. So toxic is really anything that's not healthy. The opposite of healthy, unhealthy is toxic.
Mhm.
Right. So we're talking about manipulation. We're talking about any form of emotional abuse, like name calling, jealousy, power and control struggles that happen oftentimes. So things like that can be unhealthy, which is toxic. I think that it's really hard to convince somebody that the people that they love and care about are quote unquote toxic, right? It's really hard to convince somebody, right? Because it requires a certain level of acceptance, self-awareness. It's a challenging place to be in, and I think I would encourage all couples who are going through this to, if they can, to seek couples counseling. And that's because, I'm a therapist, I'm a big advocate for therapy. But basically, the concept is, hey, I have an issue. I'm really getting concerned about how things are affecting our relationship. It doesn't necessarily have to be direct, like your parents are toxic, we need therapy, right? It can be like, I think we need to problem solve and see what's happening in our relationship. Let's go to a third party, which is very Islam informed, because going to a neutral third party is what often happened in the prophet's time, peace be upon him, all the time, right? There would be a neutral third party. They would then, facilitate conversations. And so go to an Islam informed therapist, someone who practices Islamic psychology, someone who understands your cultural context, someone who can say, okay, this is what's happening. This is how you guys can resolve this or work through this and become a more solid and grounded couple together and move forward.
Jazakallah khair. So yeah, beautiful advice. Thank you for sharing. I just had a follow-up question. So we had that question about not doing enough, for feeling the guilt of not doing enough for elderly parents. I just want to flip this and address it from the other perspective. So, for example, me and my wife, we have kids now. We're busy in life, but there's going to come a time when we're that elderly parents, right?
Yes.
So, what do we need to do now to make sure that we're not setting up in the future for like becoming dependent on our children, or putting them in a position where they're feeling guilt, right? Because like right now we're busy with kids, we're busy with life, work and stuff, but there's going to come a time when the kids are busy with their own thing, they got their own lives to live. There's our friends have, in the case of my parents, their friends have started passing away. It's just life, right? Or they're too sick, they're too old to get out. So it's just you and your wife, you and your spouse at that point. You're elder.
Yeah.
So what can couples start to prepare for that early? Because I don't know if you understand what I'm asking, but it's
absolutely, yeah. I think it's a great question. Solidify your marriage. I think that parents, individuals who, when they become parents, because you said you're a parent, right? We're always sacrificing for our kids, right? And there's a great little quote that was going around, is like, I would die for my kid. Yeah, would you live for your kid though? Right? Are you eating healthy so you'd live, right? So are you taking care of your body? Are you getting physical exercise? Are you practicing any mindfulness activities? Are you taking care of your soul? What are you doing to take care of yourself so you don't become completely dependent on your children and debilitated when you reach your 60s and 70s? Right? Are you living every single day? And if we all know that when we as we grow old together and in a marriage or in a relationship, we become more reliant on each other for support. So then why hurt each other? Why be miserable together? Why don't we work on it so we can be solid, great friends and lifetime partners? Right? So I think if we think of it that way, like we want to continue having date nights, we want to continue connecting as a couple, but also carving out time. Like, people are busy, yes, and we have aging parents, but carving out time for those aging parents is also important. And it's important to understand, do you have parents that have a different form of love language? You have to understand your parents' form of love language too, right? Because sometimes you can spend maybe 2 hours at their place, but maybe their form of love language is you cooking food and bringing it over. Maybe their form of love language is you giving them $200 a month. So it really just depends on what kind of parents that you have. And if it causes you more harm, and as they're aging as well, if it causes you more harm to go over and take care of them because you have experienced these forms of abuse that we talked about, then maybe it looks different for you. Like I said earlier, it's context specific, right? So if someone was physically abused by their parent and now their parent is aging, not everything is forgiven and forgotten, right? There's a lot of hurt and pain that remains. So it's really hard. It's not a one word answer.
Jazakallah khair. So yes, appreciate that a lot. So alhamdulillah, we're approaching the top of the hour. That like really flew by.
Yeah.
So I'm sure the more questions will keep coming in because people start watching at different times, and by the time
Yes.
we get to the
Yeah.
Q&A, so we've shared contact information, the website, so we encourage folks to reach out.
Yes.
And like Sister Kulsum said, for a lot of us in Ontario, a lot of this is a lot of people don't even know that it's covered by our workplace insurance most times.
Yes.
So I encourage everyone to look into that and put that money back into the community rather than the profits of the billion-dollar insurance companies.
Mhm.
Yes.
So encourage everyone, even if you don't feel like you need therapy or it seems
Yeah.
overwhelming, just to have those conversations, put that money in, and encourage people to look into that, inshallah. So, Sister Fatima, I'll pass it back to you to, inshallah, wrap it up and some
Thank you
final
so
thoughts.
much. I also wanted to just quickly add ISNA, the mosque in Mississauga. They do have counseling where it's like a sliding scale. You can pay whatever you
Yeah.
want. So I think that's very beneficial. And having said that, yes, thank you so much for this podcast. It's a very important topic. I'm glad, alhamdulillah, the audience benefited. Do you have any like last words before we wrap up? Or
No, but I think reach out if any of this resonates with you. Seek individual therapy, seek family therapy if possible. Build your network of chosen family. Be a realistic. Don't be idealistic. And then that doesn't mean don't be hopeful. Sometimes people confuse being hopeful versus idealism. And then also don't see your parent as a potential of what they can be. See them as they are.
yeah, so thank you so much, Sister Kulsum. Thank you guys for tuning in. May Allah put barakah in our journeys of life and allow us to grow and heal and be closer to Him and to have emotional healing. And may we always see the light after the dark tunnel. I mean, thank you so much,
Amen.
guys.